Today we're having a look if turning on XMP for your RAM actually increases performance. Now of course this is a bit of a proof of case scenario video. We probably all know what the outcome of this one is, so I'll make it quick. Let's get straight to it. Building a new PC and want a cheap Windows key? Head over to keysfan.com. Well, they offer really cheap keys for Windows and Microsoft Office. At the moment, they're currently running their Black Friday sale for the month of November. They have some pretty good prices at the moment, and they're offering 50% off Windows licenses with code BEZ50 and 62% off Microsoft Office licenses using code BEZ62. At the moment, it's a good time to upgrade from Windows 10 to 11, so take advantage of the opportunity that KeysFan is offering at the moment. I'm also happy to say, not only once have I bought a key from keysfan.com with my own money, but twice, most recently in the last couple of weeks. Their customer support was great from the first time to the second time now, and they also offer PayPal payment. So I feel safe and secure knowing that I'm paying to them, and I'm happy to recommend them as the sponsor of this channel because I have tested them twice now and they've been good both times. They do offer OEM keys instead of retail, so do keep that in mind, but overall it's a really good experience and they're reliable for what they are. I'd highly recommend to go and check them out if you guys are in the market for a Windows key, and use code BEZ50 for 50% off Windows licenses and code BEZ62 for 62% off Microsoft Office licenses. They also offer a Microsoft Office and Windows license bundle for slightly less, so it's awesome to see that they have a variety of keys available. So if you're interested, go and check them out. keysfan.com for cheaper Windows keys. For our test system today, we will be using the Ryzen 7 7800X3D with PBO on. We have an AIO being the Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 on top of it. Our GPU is the ASRock RX 9070 XT Taichi, it's stock. And for our RAM, we'll be using a 32GB kit, dual channel RAM of G-Skill DDR5 6000 CL30. Now, of course, there'll be two profiles, so that's the EXPO or XMP profile, DDR5 6000, and its timings are 30, 38, 38, 96 with 1.35 volts. And then, of course, we'll be turning XMP off to the default settings of DDR5 4800, 40, 40, 40, 77 at 1.1 volts. Do keep in mind, I will be testing everything at 1080p as well. For our motherboard, we have the ASRock X870 Taichi Lite, and for our operating system, we'll be using Windows 10 with the latest AMD drivers being 25.11.1. For our testing procedure, we'll be doing a 3-run average. The CPU is on PBO, the GPU are stock with no overclock, games are tested in full screen, rebar is on or AMD SAM, and everything will be done at 1080p for the tests we're doing today. Let's head on to the benchmarks. Let's start us off with our first game being Alan Wake 2 on 1080p. All of the games will be on 1080p on high settings. So for our XMP off, we got 116 FPS on average and 84 for 1% lows. This represented a 6% difference at 1080p for average FPS and actually a 2% difference in 1% lows, although they pretty much are very similar results on Alan Wake 2. Heading over to Counter-Strike 2, we see a bit of a difference here. For when XMP is on, we get a percentage increase of 15% on average FPS, and we get a percentage increase on 1% lows of 15%. A nice rise here that we see from the result on Counter-Strike 2, and it shows that in this type of game, especially because it's CPU bound, that of course it's better to have XMP on. On Clair Obscur Expedition 33 on Epic settings on TSR 100, we find that there's basically no difference when XMP is on and off. So we got pretty much the same result on both that we can see here. Next up, we have Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty on Ultra settings. Now, it's an interesting result here. We do see a slight increase in average FPS of just 10 FPS and a slight increase of 9 FPS on 1% lows. Although the result isn't too much of a large gap, it is good to see that with XMP On, we did have a slightly better experience, not only on average FPS, but 1% lows. On Doom: The Dark Ages, we find a pretty hefty difference. So on our average FPS, we didn't see too much of a difference of just 4 FPS. However, on our 1% lows, there was quite a big difference. We can see that it's an increase of 45% in favor of XMP being on. So it's great to see here that the stutter was a lot less. And I do have to say, from the benchmarks that I played, it was so much better when XMP was on compared to when it was off. It just felt a lot more fluid. On F124, we have an interesting result that I kinda didn't expect here. So on average FPS, we're pretty much the same, 204 for XMP on and 199 for XMP off. However, when it comes to the 1% lows, we can see that there's actually a 30% decrease in performance when XMP was turned on. Now, I might need to do some retesting in this case, but I do think that it is a bit of an odd result and kind of an outlier in these 10 games, so do take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. It's something that I might need to retest in the future. Next up, we have Hogwarts Legacy on the ultra settings with TAA high, and we can see here that there's actually not too much of a difference in terms of 1% lows or average FPS. We can see that on both results, it's just a difference of 3 FPS for both average and 1% lows. Next up, we have Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered with very high settings on TAA native. With XMP on, we got 181 FPS, and with XMP off, we got 173 on average FPS. This was a percentage difference of 5%. On a 1% lows, we find a similar story again, with there being a percentage difference of 10%. So quite in favor of XMP here, but it's clear to see it's not too much of a difference, but you better have XMP on than have it off. Next up, we have Warhammer 40k. So on our average FPS, we actually had a slight performance decrease of just 2 FPS. So not much of a difference here whatsoever. But on our 1% lows, we did see a nice rise from 73 on XMP off to 82 on XMP on. That's a percentage increase of 11%, which is nice to see when XMP is on. For our last title, last but not least, The Last of Us Part 1, we have pretty much no difference between the two. We can see that it's literally a 1% difference on average FPS and just a 3% difference on 1% low. We're having a look at the 10 game average here in terms of percentage difference for average FPS. And we can see that it was a performance increase of 4% in favor of XMP for these 10 games. The only outlier that did worse in performance for average FPS was Warhammer 40k on -2%. Counter-Strike 2 and Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty were both at 7% percentage difference, and Alan Wake 2 was at 6% percentage difference. Overall, it's pretty clear to me that it's only beneficial to have XMP on, as we already knew, but it's good to actually prove this with a graph. Heading on to our 1% lows, and this is where we see the most percentage difference. There was a total percentage increase in favor of XMP of 7% from these 10 games. We can see here that Doom: The Dark Ages is a pretty big outlier at a 58% percentage difference, and F124 at a -26% difference. Most games performed pretty well. The other two titles that were negative in favor of XMP being off were Hogwarts Legacy and Alan Wake 2. I did mention that F124 may need to be retested as well because of this result. But it's great to see that we have improved on stuttering and overall smoothness by turning on XMP, and the overall thing here is, turn on XMP. There's no point in not having it on. Just a quick thing here as well, we're having a look at total FPS for the 10 game average. We can see with XMP on, we got 182 for the 10 games and 116 for 1% lows. For XMP off, we got 174 for average FPS and 108 for 1% lows. Of course, we are seeing a good benefit here. So what are my final thoughts? And I'm going off a little bit of the script here, and it's pretty clear to see that XMP is better when it's on. Now, we of course already knew this. This is a pretty obvious fact that we've been saying for a long time now. If you're buying RAM, you definitely want to turn on XMP because the profile is there and made for you, and performance will increase as a result. Now we did see, of course, on the 1% lows that it was better by 7%, which is quite a nice increase, and it did improve stuttering quite a bit in some games like Doom: The Dark Ages, for example. Now at the same time, average FPS didn't increase as much. Generally, we saw an increase of performance of around about 4%, but hey, any percentage increase is better than none, and we didn't really see too much of a downside by having it off. So what I'd like to say for this video is pretty short, is that it was a proof of concept that XMP, of course, is the better way to go, and that you must have it on at all times. This is a setting that is basically a staple in the PC building community. Everyone knows this, and especially for computers, it's just something that should be on. You're spending the money, the profile is ready to go, so turn it on. XMP is also called EXPO as well, if you need in the BIOS. It's really easy to turn on. I'll do a small tutorial on how to turn it on as well if you're newer to PC building. Now if you're thinking, why in the world did I make this video? It's just because it's to explain to people why to turn XMP on with games, because sometimes people don't exactly get it, especially if they're newer. Please also do keep in mind that although the percentage increases are not that much for some titles, there is a point to turn it on. And remember as well that the disposition of games that I was using wasn't exactly the best examples, because not all of them were reliant completely on the CPU. I did test at 1080p deliberately to make sure that we are more CPU bound, but of course a lot of these games are not going to be. I mean, CS2 is a good example that's relatively CPU bound, but a lot of these games are quite graphically demanding, but of course we try to eliminate that by being at 1080p. But hey, turn it on, do not have it off, unless your RAM profile is not working for some reason, and if it's happening in that case, it's time to return your RAM. There is something wrong with it. Could be your motherboard or CPU as well, but unlikely. Overall though, it's great as a proof of concept video, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Check out keysfan.com for some awesome cheap Windows keys, using code BEZ50 for 50% off Windows licenses, and code BEZ62 for 62% off Microsoft Office license. That about sums up the video. Check out wisetech.org for some more awesome content. But other than that, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!